Do you want to be a doormat? Or do you actually want to stand for something? All this and more on the Self-Evident Podcast. All right, welcome to the Self-Evident Podcast. We have a great one for you guys today. We're going to be discussing really the tension and the battle between Islam, Christianity, East, West, that kind of thing. But first, go to theselfevidenttruth.com. Be sure to check out our blogs, check out our resources. We got t-shirts, we got merch, got all that stuff. If you wish to become a torchbearer, by all means, sign up with our monthly program. You can click that donate button at theselfevidenttruth.com. Now, we're going to get right into it. This is going to be a great interview because it's going to fill in the gaps for a lot of people in the West who maybe you're not thinking about this type of thing, especially when the news, it goes a different direction. It kind of disappears off the map. And so you stop thinking about it. And now if you've been a listener for a while, you've listened to us, follow what's going on in the UK. But maybe it stopped there. Maybe you haven't made those connections of, hey, how does this relate to us in America? Because so often what we watch across in Europe or on the news is, well, that's not going to affect us here. Except it is, and it does, and it has. So today, I have with me Raymond Ibrahim, author of books like Defenders of the West, Sword and Scimitar, Crucified Again. Mind you, I will put these up in the comments. And make sure you go purchase these books, promote his work, go see what he's got to offer. His website has a lot of awesome blogs, articles. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. There we go. Raymond, sir, how are you doing today?
Good, Mike. Thanks. Good to be with you.
I appreciate it. So your background, Distinguished Senior Shillman Fellow at Gatestone Institute, Judith Friedman Rosen Fellow at Middle East Forum. Your parents grew up Coptic Christians, Middle East. They came to America. So you've really been in both of these realms for a long time. And I saw your podcast interview with Chase, and he's a friend of ours. And it was like, man, I really want to get this guy on because I've been talking about the UK stuff. And I think especially in America, outside of 9/11, we've had a bit of a disconnect in terms of the influence of Islam. And obviously, for a couple of years, we saw this growing concern of Islam and Muslim invasion, as they were terming it. And then, of course, everybody got labeled Islamophobes. And you just don't know what you're talking about. It's religion of peace. And what's going on in the UK has been storming for years. You know, the rings, as we'll call them, to save ourselves with the algorithms, the child rings that were going on there. And so I want to jump off with you. I'll explain for the listeners, just in case they don't know what's going on. There was a stabbing attack that took place not too long ago where a 17-year-old boy attacked a little girl's Taylor Swift dance class. 3 girls were murdered, others were injured, and immediately protests flared up, and there was confusion about who this boy was, and immediately the thought was Muslim migrant because the MO was a stabbing attack, which they've seen plenty of times, but it was also boiling under the surface of a 2-tiered system. And we've seen migrant men, harm children, get suspended sentences, and yet a native man protests and gets a 1.5 years in prison. And so I wanted to jump off with you on this point of why do we think there's such that 2-tiered system going on in the UK? What do you think is underneath the surface of all of that?
Well, first, the two-tier system you mentioned is definitely a fact for all the reasons that you just mentioned, and even more. And just to give some little context about that most recent stabbing, it was a migrant man who I believe he was a teenager, like you said, I think 17, born there in the UK to African parents, and what had happened is everyone assumed he was Muslim. I mean, that's the narrative, and
Right.
they got angry, and it was sort of anti-Islamic protests. What the media didn't tell you is there's a reason they assumed he was Muslim. There's a lot of reasons, and one of them is stabbing people randomly is an Islamic thing in Western Europe. It's very, very common. In fact, in the UK and Ireland, I don't know if Ireland's even in the UK or part of Britain. I always forget that
I'm
part.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one that gets confused on that. It's like, okay, what's UK? What's
Yeah,
Britain?
I
What?
think Northern Ireland is part of it, but not Catholic Ireland. Anyway,
Right.
Ireland, which is part of the British Isles, we'll
There we
say,
go.
yeah. Less than a year ago, the same exact thing happened. A Muslim migrant went and stabbed preschool children, toddlers, something like 3, 4 years old. I don't remember he killed any, or one was in critical condition, including some staffer, etc. So there's a reason that people are, they've had enough. This is very, I don't want to say it's very common, though I suppose I can, but it's not uncommon. And then, I mean, put aside children, Muslims just randomly in the UK, in Europe in general, just stabbing people, kind of common. All right, so you can understand why the people, had enough and got
Right.
angry and rebelled and protested and accused him of being a Muslim, et cetera, et cetera. Then they came out. The authorities said, no, he's not a Muslim, et cetera, et cetera. Though, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's still up in the air because they do lie about this sort of thing. And the main thing they're emphasizing is that his name is traditional African name. It's not an Islamic name, but the area his family's from, which I think is Kenya or Uganda. Muslims have traditional names. They don't have a Muhammad or Ahmed as a name. So anyway, be that as it may, the point is native Brits had enough of migrants, Muslim or non-Muslim, third worlders, I suppose, engaging in violence against their children and people in general. And as you said, the authorities, two-tier system. So basically, and we've seen this here in the United States, but basically, if you're on the right, as they call it, and you're protesting, then you are enemy number one. You're the greatest threat to the world. You're a Nazi, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same sort of, that was the reaction, of course, there in the UK. And as far as when Muslims do this sort of thing, in fact, they also rioted very recently and apparently took over Birmingham, England.
Yeah.
And there's videos of them just running amok in the street, chasing reporters out, slashing tires. And apparently the police are doing nothing. We're doing nothing about it. Telling them things like, okay, please go submit your weapons back in the mosques, according to one report, which to me is not surprising because mosques historically have been depositories for weapons. That's actually well known. So, the two-tier system is there. As to why it is, well, that's the big question that everyone's trying to understand. And, the answer that we're usually given, there's two faces to this response. The main one is the elites are naive, they're stupid, they don't know they're the last ones who are going to be, they're feeding the crocodile, they're going to be the last one. I personally don't think that is. I believe there's an agenda. I don't think they're stupid. I don't think they're naive. I think they know exactly what they're doing. Whether it's risky or not, obviously it is risky for all concerned, including them, I suppose, but it's a concerted effort. And it's really complex, but I don't know if it's just a demographic change. I mean, we're seeing this all over Europe where countries like in Germany and the UK and France, they really have a lot. According to official statistics, I think it's actually even bigger. But in some of these countries, it's already at 10%. That's a big number, 10% of Muslims, especially when you compare and contrast them to the native, Germans or Brits or Frenchmen.
Yeah.
One Muslim for every 9, it's substantial. Okay. If these Europeans were the way they were, let's say a century ago, it wouldn't be substantial, wouldn't be a problem. But
And
I'm of course referring to the emasculation of Western man.
which is a massive topic that I want to
Right,
dive
right.
into. But to
Yeah.
your point, and I've been thinking a lot about this of if you look at Europe, especially say UK, the British Isles, it's such an enclosed space. So that to me, that demographic shift is so exponential as well. Where here in America, yes, there is a massive demographic shift going on, but it's going to take us longer to really feel the effects of it in terms of concentrated events because we're so spread out versus you can get from the bottom to the top of the UK in, 10, 12 hours, right? And so I've watched this, especially the travel throughout Europe, and you watch these migrant waves move through. And I agree with you of some people will look at these governments and say, oh no, they just don't know what they're doing. But if they didn't know what they were doing, they would recognize the mistake or recognize the fault, and there would still be some semblance of consistency and justice. Like, oh man, we've got to at least protect little kids. But you're watching what seems to be coordinated or concerted effort of, no, we will look the other way because this achieves our means, And
Yeah.
and I'm curious because I feel there's two actions at play, and this is where I want to get especially your expertise. Islam seems to be great with the left as long as as long as they become good bedfellows for a while. And what do you give the listeners, especially, insight to the Islamic mindset, especially in terms of, we look at the transgender issues, the homosexuality issues, just this progressivism in the West, and yet they're not coming out in full force against all of that yet. So speak to why would they not come out against all of that full force yet in the West, even as they're setting up their families there?
Yeah, well, it really goes on to this ancient dictum: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so for the left, and for the record, I hate using that word because I think it's almost a euphemism, and it legitimizes them because it puts them on a political continuum. Okay, but I'd rather use other words that may not be politically correct, but for convenience sake, I'll use the left.
Mm-hmm.
So the left, I think its ultimate enemy, if you want to look at this from a grand panoramic sort of civilizational point of view, I think the left's grand enemy is Christianity, Christian heritage, Christian culture, old Europe, old traditional Christianity, which laid the bedrock of various civilizations, including the United States, I would argue. So for the left, that's its enemy, and overturning it any which way is what they want to do. Now, the historic enemy of Christendom was Islam, and that went on for, and when we can get into that, that's its own topic.
Yeah.
That books of what happened between Islam and the West. But the historical nemesis of Christian civilization was always Islam. If you look at the map today, there's a reason why you have Europe, and then all around it are Muslim countries. Those Muslim countries used to be actually more Christian than Europe. Okay, and they got conquered, and basically Europe was, it was like being holed in. It became the last bastion of Christianity, which was also harried for centuries and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so for the left, I think they know, and you see the same sorts of behavior from extreme leftists, atheists, Satanists, LGBT, whatever people, and Muslims. Even though, as you're pointing out, they're so antithetical culturally on various topics. So, for example, churches being burned throughout the Western world has become such a common thing. I follow it rather closely. I know some websites, and it's a daily thing, every single day. Various churches, especially in Europe, also in America, and also in Canada, are either desecrated, burned, crosses broken, beheaded statues of the Virgin Mary, baby Christ, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always either a Muslim or a leftist, extreme leftist. And isn't that ironic? Okay.
Right.
I mean, that to me, speaks volumes, and it even echoes down history, because if you go back in the past, Muslims and pagans, including Vikings, I mean, I know Vikings are romanticized today, but if you really go to the history, the Vikings and Arabs actually had a deal for slaves. I mean, most of the slave raids on England and Lindisfarne, et cetera, were actually sent down to the caliphates and sold there. But anyway, you can see with the Vikings, the burning of churches. Same thing with Arabs and Muslims were doing the same thing. So you fast forward, and we have the same sort of double-pronged attack expressing itself. And it's also interesting to note that, so as you said, and, to firmly establish it, the left and Islam seem so diametrically opposed. The left is sexually promiscuous, or sexually perverted, essentially.
Yeah.
atheistic, liberal, et cetera, whereas Islam is extremely conservative. So how are they, bedfellows? But and I've already given the answer, which is they're working together because they have a big, greater enemy. But other ways that you can see their behavior so similar is we're familiar with blasphemy laws in Islam, where if you just criticize Muhammad, or step on a page of the Quran, you, not just by the people and the mobs, but the governments themselves, especially places like Pakistan, Egypt, that you'll go not just to jail but possibly get the death sentence. And the reason for that has always been, people think it's because Muslims are really touchy, and of course a lot of the mob is touchy, but really the reason behind it, and if you delve into the history of Islam, the scholars and the sheikhs and the ulama, this is what they said, is basically because attacking Islam or Muhammad, his person, through words is much more dangerous than violence against Islam. Because Islam in the end is like a house made of cards, which is so easy to blow over and destroy. And if critical thinking and free speech is allowed to vent against Islam, it would just fall apart. It really would, of all the religions. And that's a whole different topic we can talk about. But now, look at the left and their policies. It's identical. What's happening in England, what's happening in the United States, where if you speak up, if you say the truth, you're attacked, you're a science denier, even though you're actually, from the people who are telling you to use different, not to mispronounce someone, they're calling us, science deniers, etc. And people go to jail, people lose their jobs, people get canceled. And it's the same reason, because the stuff that the left espouses and the things that they want us to just like dummies go around chanting their mantras, for example, that there's no gender or whatever, are also like a house of cards, which are easily just collapsed. So you have to shut people up, because if they're allowed to speak and criticize it, there's a snowball effect, just like in the Islamic world, where more people open their eyes, more people get it, more people speak. And then the current order, whether it's the leftist or Islamic order, gets overthrown. So you can even see that in their policies. This is why the left, lies, of course, and says, no, we're doing this because we're trying to prevent hate. And I mean, at this point in the game, when they call something hate speech, it's truth speech, and they're just trying to make it look bad. You're a bad person for saying that. You're horrible. No, it's actually oftentimes very accurate and very true. So, and that's what's happening in England, for example, when people rise up against Muslims or migrants for the violence that's happening. And I saw a study recently in Germany, something like 6 to 7 out of 10 violent crimes are from migrants. I mean, what you talk about creating your own headache, you have your own country, your own civilization, your own borders, everything's nice. So let's bring in people who just spike up, the crime rate. I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's what blows me away. And then, of course, there's obviously that movement to ban the AFD, and anybody who's right wing is obviously a Nazi and all of that. And you can't help but look at it and say, okay, this is a concerted effort right here. This is coordinated.
Yeah.
And you watch. You said something that's so fascinating to me that I haven't put into proper context until now. I love looking at things from a spiritual warfare standpoint. And it's like, okay, what would Satan be doing if he's trying to win the war, right? And where you see these commonalities move into play, these odd bedfellows, so to speak, coming against Christianity, it's like, okay, there's a common denominator here. And something you said, it's really the fragility of the lie. So whether it's the progressive side of things, whether it's the Islamic side of things, they want to shut down speech, because if speech goes long enough, it creates truth. Let me rephrase, it allows truth to come out. And then you look at the globalist movement, where these leaders are very attached to each other in a international global order type of sense. And once again, shutting down social media platforms and all of that. And I've been fascinated by this connection between Islam. It's really making another move west, and obviously your background, your history of those previous movements into the West, into Europe and all of that. And we're watching that in real time, not just in Europe, but also in America. And so what do you think Americans should be aware of that they're not necessarily aware of right now in terms of that movement of Islam? especially into the American Western world.
The good thing about Islam is it's very predictable, and if you understand its mechanisms and how it's worked, and if you look at it historically, all you're going to see in the present is a great continuity between the past and the present. And there's different strategies in it, but the bottom line is it's an imperative for Muslims. Or let's actually step before that. The problem with Westerners thinking about Islam is they just can't help but project either their Christianity or just Christianity in general because that's what they know is religion. And so they think, and of course they project modern Western sort of secularized Christianity onto Muslims, which means they think Muslims and everyone else of any religion, really their religion is essentially good, and it's not part of the government, it's something spiritual, it's for their own edification, makes them a better person, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first problem. Yeah, the first problem is just projecting what they know about the word religion onto Islam. And in reality, Islam is none of that. Okay, Islam, is very immensely legalistic. Okay, and I'm primarily focusing on Sunni Islam, which represents 90% of the Muslim world at this point. But it's very legalistic. It's very black and white. So what it commands and what it doesn't, and what you're banned from doing, are just laid out. There's no mystery. There's no, and that's why when everyone tells you no, Islam is this, it's actually very easy to determine what Islam is. You look at the Quran, you look at the Hadith, the words of Muhammad, his behavior, and then you look at the ulama, the consensus, okay, of the broader Islamic community, and there you go. So one of these things is the conquest of the world under Islamic rule and order, and that goes all the way back to the Quran, to Muhammad's words. And that's what propelled the Islamic conquest of essentially 3/4 of what was once Christian territory. Again, to reiterate, in the 7th century, when the Muslims broke out of Arabia and waged the Great Jihad, they ended up conquering literally, especially later on with the Turks, who conquered Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, which is one of the oldest. All of those areas were the oldest Christian regions: Asia Minor, Egypt, Syria, Tunis, Carthage. This is where you had of the 5 major Christian centers of the ancient world, 4 got conquered, and that would be Constantinople much later, but earlier Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, and even Rome got sacked. Most people don't know this, in the mid-9th century by Muslim raiders from North Africa. And this sort of thing went on, and reached 100 years after Muhammad. Islam was in the middle of France. But in that case, they came through force, and actually the Franks stopped them and kicked them back during the Battle of Tours, for example, as opposed to inviting them in by the millions like they're doing now. Right. And we see that Muslims haven't changed from the past to the present. It's the same idea. But when this went on century after century, I started talking about the 7th century. You go into the 16th century, now they're in Iceland. Muslims from North Africa have reached Iceland, the farthest, innermost region of Europe, where they're collecting slaves under the same sort of jihadist imperative. Right. Okay. And then even America's very first war as a nation after it gained independence was against Muslims, the same Barbary pirates. When Jefferson and Adams met with the ambassador from Barbary, and they said, "Why are you doing this? Why can't we have peace? We didn't do anything to you." He basically paraphrased the Quran 9:5, which is called the sword verse, which said, he basically said, "Our prophet and our holy book have permitted us to attack and plunder and kill you until you convert, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And the great enlightened thinker Jefferson had no idea what this guy was talking about, because that just didn't, again, because he was projecting his own worldview. That, hey, don't you just want commerce and business and let's just work together. He didn't get it. Okay, so war came out of the very first war for the United States. So that's Islam. And then, but there were different iterations of this depending on circumstances. And in fact, Islam is very elastic, and it allows different things. So, for example, Islam, for all its draconian rules, etc., allows Muslims to denounce Muhammad, curse Muhammad, say they've apostatized, and let's say partake of communion, become Christians, let's say, if it's to save their lives, or even to just as a stratagem to empower Islam over the infidels. And this has happened. We have many cases of this. The most obvious and noteworthy happened in Spain after the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain by Christians from Muslim conquest. Spain was conquered by Muslims in the year 711, and it took literally centuries until 1492. well, until actually Islam was completely subdued in Granada. And when that happened, 500,000 Muslims said, "Hey, don't kick us out. We're becoming Christians." And they did become Christians. And they were, we have records of bishops of Spain, etc., saying things like, "These people were better Christians than us. They were more punctual to church. They knew the Bible inside and out." And then we come to find out they were at home preaching jihad to their children against us. Okay. And that's what led to the final expulsion of Islam. These are the inconvenient nuances you never hear of in history class.
And
you just hear these people, crazy Christians, forced everyone to convert. They didn't believe in diversity.
And I think most people don't understand or don't know that whole lie concept. That no, it's okay to lie to the people around you because the objective or the goal is the most important thing. Because
and it's the left again, right? This is the left again. The end justifies the means.
Any means necessary. And we as Christians, we look at, oh no, I would never do that. Because for us, it's the truth no matter what. I can't sacrifice truth and conviction for the sake of the short-term goal. And I think that leads well to like, okay, we've got Islam that is putting in its roots, it's putting in its stable pillars in America, especially through a porous border, and we can talk about that if you wish. But I am interested also in this concept of how should Christianity respond and how is Christianity actually responding? And sadly, I think the UK is a microcosm of that. But considering you do so well of recognizing both sides, I'd like you to talk about, okay, we've got this Islamic, we see what's going on with them. What about the Christian side? What should they be doing and what are they actually doing?
Well, I'll start by telling you what Christians did historically for 85% of the interchange with Islam between the 7th century and let's say until 19th century, and it was basically fight back without compunction, without apology, and without doubts, without thinking, oh, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek, and this sort of thing. Nobody had any qualms about that. I guess because it wasn't theoretical for them as it is for a lot of us. We have the convenience to say and sit back and say, no violence. But when you're there and you're watching your wife and children raped and beheaded, you start thinking, maybe that's not what Jesus is permitting. Maybe I should do something about it. So obviously there was no hesitation for them to fight tooth and nail, right, to keep them out of the regions that they were trying to conquer in Europe, and also to try to reclaim them. That is, after all, what the Crusades was. The Crusades, for all the condemnation they get, it was just a recovery of territory that was Christian and conquered by Islam. We always hear of the great sack of the Crusaders. They took Jerusalem and the bloodbath that followed. Well, we don't hear about centuries earlier when, the Muslims besieged Jerusalem and killed the Christians, right?
And I point out to people when they bring this up is like, so would we be loving to our family and our friends if we're being attacked and our family is being carted off? That, oh, well, I've got to love my enemies and I've got to allow them, to do what they want. That's actually more evil than me standing and defending against evil,
It's making a virtue of a vice, cowardice.
Yes.
And we can even talk about groups like the Knights Templars and the Hospitallers. I mean, these were the most religious guys. These were monks who were dedicated to religion, and they were the greatest fighters at the same time. So there was no contradiction historically for this, to stand back and fight. Now you move and the irony is back then, if you look, people, again, this sort of projection. People look today and they see the West as supreme and powerful economically, militarily, whatever. And this goes back to the colonial era in the 1800s. But they don't know that for most of Europe's history, it was the underdog. It was the one that was being attacked. It was the weak one. So if you look just at the Ottoman Empire, this was a vast behemoth that terrorized, especially Eastern Europe. And and so they fought back, these weak, outnumbered. Now, the irony is you move to today where the West is powerful and the Islamic world in reality is not. It's very weak, and here Westerners are being terrorized by Muslims left and right. Why? And you find out it's not because the Muslims are breaking in like they did. It's because the West is bringing them in. The West is apologizing and dissembling about their motives. So it's, it's an internal issue, definitely, fifth column, if you will. That's, the left, as we call it. But the other issue, I think, and this I believe is also intentional. Like I said, a lot of Christians, they think, that their religion is passive. Okay, I don't ever do violence. I'm always turning the cheek. I'm loving my enemy, et cetera, et cetera. I honestly believe that, that is, of course, part of the message of Christianity, but it was always balanced, and that's the point. When you look at the word heresy, a heresy is when you actually put a lot of focus on one thing and then eliminate everything else. And that's sort of what happened now, which is that has been thrust up. This is what Christianity is. Be a doormat, okay? Right. And do not do anything else, or else you're a hypocrite and you're evil. You're not a true Christian, okay? Because Jesus was a hippie walking around, and that's how you have to be. And I think, what a wonderful message for the enemies of Christianity. If you're a staunch of the left, let's say, and you hate Christianity, wouldn't you love that kind of Christianity, which never ever does anything, never judges, never opens its mouth, just wants to be a doormat? Or if you're a Muslim, well, of course, talk about easy pickings. So I think a lot of non-Christian forces have subverted the Christian message for maybe a century at least, and really propped up that aspect at the exclusion of everything else. And that has completely weakened it, and it's led precisely to what we're seeing today.
And I think that plays back into that concept of what do your enemies ask of you, and then be very wary of that. And it's funny because what does the church get attacked for? The Crusades, right? You were, and of course all the lies and the revisionists happen. But what's really at the core of that? It's a organized, powerful, muscular Christianity. Well, we can't possibly have that. And I can't help but look at that, especially with this swing of young men that are leaning back into, the whole trad movement, I guess you would call it. But Catholicism, the Orthodox Church, like this more muscular Christianity, and it's a revolt against, they've been taught for so long, no, you have to turn the other cheek, you have to be completely passive. Jesus would never stand up, to just sit down. And I can't help but hear that message and hear the messaging of be silent, and the messaging of Islam coming in, well, it's peace and you've got to just submit to it. And go, boy,
look at Pope Francis. He manifests all this, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. And he's the walking manifestation of what I'm talking about. And guess what? The media tends to like him, right?
There you go. And
I wonder why. Even though the media is leftist and it hates Christians and it doesn't want any kind of Christian rise, but they love and promote him. Well, so he's I think a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Right. If the world loves you, you're probably doing something wrong. And I look at the UK and my heart breaks because I see where it's seeming to set in that, I'm not saying that it's gone too far, but you don't have an organized, ready to defend Christianity group. You've got kind of sporadic young men in little pockets, but the whole system is pretty entrenched against them. And then I look to America and it's like, okay, we don't have much time left, but to me, there's still a chance. What do you think has to happen, especially in the hearts of young Christian men who are coming up, to help stave off this type of really spiritual warfare that's being manifested in the physical?
Yeah, I agree. And they have to guard themselves, guard their minds and their hearts from the mass propaganda that's just emanating from everywhere. Okay, whether it's from the kindergarten to grad level universities, whether it's the newsrooms, whether it's Hollywood, wherever you look, this stuff is just being bombarded. And so people, by nature, people are like sheep. In the end, they're actually much more common than not common. And it's the rare person that is willing to break the mold and not go along with what everyone else is saying and doing. So that's chief among what they should be doing. But of course, immerse themselves in the truth, whether it's a historical truth, scriptural truth. I think all of that has a strengthening, and allows one to rise above what we're discussing, this propaganda and this intentional emasculation that's going on, to neuter them and to just incapacitate them so they can't do anything. That's why I'm saying, whereas once Europe was weak and outnumbered vastly, it was able to fight back and heroically defend itself. Whereas today, it's so much more powerful and it's completely being pulverized by migrants. People who arrived in the UK and elsewhere, their hat in their hands because they were beggars and had nothing to do. Now they're terrorizing the place. And again, to me, that's not a reflection of Islam, because Muslims and Islam do what they've always done. This is a reflection of a complete change in the Western response and mentality. And so that definitely has to change. People need to rise above it. I'm glad to hear, like you said, people are turning more to Catholicism and Orthodoxy, because in the end, much of what we're talking about is not, to me, I don't like to get bogged into theological or spiritual debates, but I do like the fact that I call Catholicism and Orthodoxy sort of traditional Christianity, well, because they are, and historically, but I don't know, they produced people who were able to do what we're talking about. You have to understand, with the Protestant Reformation, because Catholicism was so demonized, and rightfully so. I'm not Catholic. I'm not defending one or the other, but it became kind of strategic to attack anything, and that's how the Crusades first were taken down. Because look at these crazy, evil, violent Catholics, and so it got pulled out of context intentionally. It got manipulated to look in the worst possible way, and then to be a good Christian, you have to be the opposite of that. Okay. So you see how this worked throughout the centuries, until you have what you have today, doormat Christianity. Definitely, if this trajectory doesn't change, it's going to end up in death, extinction.
Yeah.
And a final point I'll just make is, when I look at Europe, especially, and and then now this is a point that has nothing to do with the religion. Okay, this is about self-preservation. I just find it interesting that objectively, if you look at the world, okay, white people are like not even 4% of the population. And yet it is this 4% that is continually hammered about how they have to give up their religion, they have to give up their culture, they have to give up their heritage, they have to give up their land. Okay. And if they don't, they're the bad people. Right. It's just, I've said this before jokingly. It's like, we're going to need, reservations and parks just for white people to live in, because they're on their way to extinction. So, put away aside religion and history and all that. I just, from a self-preservation point of view, I'm baffled by what I'm watching.
And there's probably plenty of white people that, if you just set aside some reservations in, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, they'll be fine. I tell people, do you realize I am the most hated person on earth? I am Christian. I am white. I am a male. I am heterosexual. I'm married. Like, the rest of the world hates me.
There's a patriarchy, toxic masculinity.
You're right. All 4% of us in the world's population. So no,
2%, because the other 2 are women, and
there you go.
Exactly. They're also enabling what's going on. So anyway, we'll stop there.
So no, I want to thank you so much, sir. I would love to have you back on sometime if you'd be willing to join us. But I always do this with all of our guests. I'd like to give you the last word. One last thing you'd like to leave our audience, our listeners, with, what you think is important for them to carry away from this conversation.
From this particular conversation, I would say just to, wake up to reality, because reality is not being told to you, even on Fox News. Okay, to be sure. All right. And don't put all your, eggs in one basket. Don't think if Trump wins, a lot's going to change. I don't think much will change at all. Okay.
Thank you.
I like him personally because he makes me laugh, but I don't think that I see Republicans, which he's become a trademark Republican, and Democrats, 2 sides of one coin, and it's given as an illusion to make you think, oh, look, you got what you want, now relax, while everything continues like it was before. Okay, with a couple of nominal concessions. So stop, get your knowledge from where you should get it. Wake up, be objective, learn about the true history, which admittedly is hard because that also is being dissembled wherever you go. And I went to Barnes and Nobles recently, and I was looking at the Middle East Islamic history section, and it's all the worst books because I'm familiar with them because I read them in college. But yeah, Karen Armstrong, John Esposito. It's like you're better off not if you don't, you're better off just being an ignorant bumpkin than reading those books, because at
Right.
least if you're ignorant, you're ignorant and you're open to different ideas. But if you read these books, you're indoctrinated in the exact opposite of reality, and you think you know it all now because, oh, I read a book. So it is definitely harder to do, but yeah, just understand that the left is your enemy. Okay, and if they could, they would have you dead. Okay, but they're still very weak numerically. All right, and Islam, Islam is refreshing because, like I said, Islam is what it always was. So at least I understand Islam inside and out. Nothing about it ever shocks me, and every time I look and something shocks people, I'm like, well, this is Islam doing what it's always done. Nothing strange. It's the only strange thing is what's happening is how the West has been responding to Islam, which is in fact empowering it inside the West itself for the reasons that we discussed. I'll leave it there.
No, I love it because um, we harp on a look. We'll say where Trump does well, but we say where he does wrong, and we hate this idol worship of the man. Like everybody wants a king, and so you nailed
Yeah.
that. We love American history. We love the founders, the true history of America's founding, and all of that. So you nailed the history. You nailed. Don't pay attention to, understand what's going on, but don't pull in all of the
Yeah.
establishment resources and the misdirection. So you nailed it. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you.
You spoke our audience's language. So no, I want to say thank you so much, sir. Where can people find you, find your resources, and help support you?
Thanks. Probably the best place is my website, which all the algorithms conceal and so forth. And it's just my name, RaymondIbrahim.com, Raymondibrahim.com. And everything that is there, my articles, my videos, my books, links to my books, and a contact page. Also, you can donate there.
Awesome.
I also have some presence on social media, though I rarely go there. But you can probably find me, except in Facebook, where I'm completely suppressed because I used to have a very large following and thousands of likes, and then one day just it became like 2 likes, and people were like, "How come you stopped posting?" And so I learned I've been shadow banned for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years.
It's Facebook used to be good for us as well, and then
Yeah,
it just
yeah, it
one
was
day it
very
dropped
good.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah. So all right. So thank you so much, sir. Guys, go support him. Go to his website. We'll be sure to post it up in the comments. So thank you,
good.
sir. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All
Thanks,
right.
man.
Thanks. Bye. So guys, go check out his stuff. Be sure to check out his blog, get his books, follow him. But do not forget, like, we still have time to actually move forward. We've got time to do something here. And it really is going to take throwing off the cowardice and throwing off believing that what they tell you must be true, so you must follow it. And I am encouraged that there is that next generation rising up. You just have to actually believe that the Lord can move through you and you can do something. So thank you so much to all of you. We appreciate you. We will catch you guys tomorrow.